I hope that you find the warmth of the service helping you to survive the warmth of outside world. There is a funny detail about Jewish stories. Many people think that they are unique and unprecedented. Stories we tell, wisdom we share, are often presented as distinctive and unparalleled. For example, there is a Jewish story that I remember hearing from a rabbi when I was a teenager, thinking that it is a uniquely Jewish story. And I've been telling it since as a Jewish story. What turned out, when in preparation to this service, I Googled it for the first time in my life. And I realized that it is actually a very famous story that is presented as an ancient Chinese story. Either I was misled, or Judaism is not as unique as many of us think it is. So regardless of its origin, the story is still great. And here it is. There was a farmer who had a son. One day, the farmer's horse ran away. And the neighbors said, "Oh, such a bad luck." But the farmer calmly replied, "Maybe." Days later, the horse returned. And such a surprise, it brought with it several wild horses. Neighbors proclaimed, "You are so lucky." And the farmer said, "Maybe." Then his son tried to tame one of the horses, the new horses, but it was very difficult. It was a wild horse. And he fell, breaking his leg. Again, neighbors said, "What a misfortune it is. Such a bad luck you have." "Maybe," he replied. Soon after, a war broke out, and soldiers came to the village to recruit young men to the war. And because of the son's injury, he was spared. And the neighbors said, "You know the rest." And the person said, "Maybe," and so on and so forth. We often don't know in the moment whether something is good or bad. We might think we do, but only with time can we begin to see the full picture. Sometimes what begins as a misfortune can turn into something positive. One similar story in the Torah is exactly the one that we read today. It's the one about King Balak and the prophet Balaam. The king, frightened by the growing number and perceived strength of the Israelites, hires the prophet Balaam to curse them. What's interesting in this story is that Balak, the king, doesn't ask who the Israelites are. Well, we can assume he knows. But he doesn't try to make peace with them first. He hires Balaam, the prophet for hire, or some kind of a magician, or not magician, the sorcerer, and the prophet, to curse them. This fear of the other, of immigrants, is sadly a timeless human impulse. So making a long story short, a part of it we've heard today about the talking donkey, Balaam ultimately agrees to go. But something extraordinary happens. Instead of saying curses that Balaam was hired to do, he blessed the Israelites. And one of those blessings is the one we said today. Ma tovu alecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Israel. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. In time, it has become a part of our morning liturgy. The text that should have been a curse became one of the Judaism's most beautiful and distinctive prayers. The Talmud rabbis imagined that Balaam, even after hearing from God and seeing God's signs, such as talking Shias, still wanted to curse the Jewish people. But each curse turned into a blessing against his will, say the rabbis. Rabbis of Talmud said that he tried to curse the Jewish people by saying that they shouldn't have synagogues. So the Talmud slightly reinterpreted it, saying that the Balaam tried to introduce a law banning the Israelites from having synagogues and gathering places, but instead a blessing came out of his mouth. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob, which the rabbis understand as saying, despite Balaams and Balaks of this world, look how many great synagogues we have. Jewish people didn't lose faith and devotion to Judaism even when faced with dark moments in our history. In other words, people's intentions don't always lead to the desired outcome. Sometimes malicious intent leads to the opposite reaction and opposite result. Philosopher Martin Buber had a great commentary on Balaam. In one of his articles, he wrote that Balaam had a gift of approaching and hearing God, but never truly understand what to do with what he's heard. He didn't understand what it means to be a prophet. A prophet, explains Buber, never foretells a fixed, unchangeable future. True prophets don't predict what will happen tomorrow. Instead, they announce a present that requires human choice and decision. It is a present in which the future of being prepared is being prepared, but whose outcome depends on the work and decisions of human beings. In other words, prophet is not someone who predicts the future, but someone who warns of possible outcomes of today's choices. How relevant is this message today? It is not only the reality that we need to confront, but the way we react to it. So what is the reality? Are there modern Balaks and Balaams of the world today? And perhaps the reality is yes. That in the past year, in this country, anti-Semitism has remained at a very high level, with over 3,500 anti-Semitic incidents reported to CST. And you can see the comparison over the years. Quite a scary number. And it is twice as high as in 2020 or 2022. I think it's essential and very important to acknowledge that anti-Semitism is real, and I know that some of our members have suffered from verbal abuse and threats. But seeing numbers and acknowledging the reality must not be enough. We need to decide what to do with it. What should be our reaction? Respond to hatred with hatred? We know that it rarely leads to a healing outcome. The most common response is to enhance security and raise awareness. Historically, the Jewish community in the UK has been outstanding in ensuring the safety of Jewish spaces, and I hope it continues to do so. But we have been incredibly fortunate to have good security, making synagogues and all Jewish spaces in the UK safe. In addition, there are marches against anti-Semitism, political representation of the issue and of anti-Jewish hatred, and many trainings of public institutions being conducted every year. And yet, it seems not to be enough. The number is still quite high. Professor Larry Hoffman once said, if you want to change the world, you need to find a way to speak about it differently. You need to find a way to speak about it differently, and I seem to... Have I lost the page? Interesting. Yeah. If you need to change the world, you need to speak about it differently. That is what Balaam has ultimately done, or was forced to do. His language changed. And those words, ironically, became a source of strength for the people he was hired to and persuaded to harm. So the question we must ask, can we learn to speak about anti-Semitism differently? Can we, as Jews in Britain, as human beings, find ways to talk about anti-Semitism not only as a crisis, but as a call to action? Is there a way to turn this misfortune into a blessing, at least partially? And I think there is. What I've noticed in the last few years is that the response to anti-Semitism of most Jews today was to go inside, hide, seek refuge in a tribal group, saying that the outside world is against us. And many of us have felt very lonely and misunderstood. Today I would like to argue that anti-Semitism must stop being the force to drive us into small groups, but a call to stand with others who also receive unpleasant messages. A call to bridge the divide with our neighbors who, like us, are targeted because of their religion, because of being seen as the powerful other. Anti-Semitism is not the only hate that has been on the rise in the UK and around the world. Islamophobia follows the same trend. Over 6,000 anti-Muslim cases have been recorded in the UK, more than 70% increase from 2 years ago. It follows a similar trend. Anti-Jewish and anti-Muslim cases seem to be connected in their trends to increase. They are both rooted in ignorance, scapegoating, and age-old need to curse that which people don't understand and perceive as different. So far, the Jewish public's response to anti-Semitism has predominantly been an outrage. It's one of the strategies, it's working, but it's not the only one. It can also be a relationship. Another way of fighting anti-Semitism is to fight against hate in general. It must be us walking into mosques and inviting imams into our synagogues. It must be breaking bread at iftars, the iftar tables, and Shabbat dinners together. It must be creating spaces where our children learn that curses can be interrupted, that Balaks and Balaams of today can be overcome, not with weapons, not with megaphones, but with songs, friendship, and shared dialogue. Perhaps we need to reach out to our Muslim neighbors and organize a shared march against all forms of hatred and racism and stand together in unity. Imagine how powerful this would be, Jewish and Muslim people standing together. And possibly, another way of finding different language around anti-Semitism is that we might acknowledge that the suffering of innocent Palestinians and the lack of official Jewish acknowledgement of it is also an example of a different way of speaking. Speaking about it openly might help with fighting anti-Semitism too. Transformation is not a miracle that happens to us. It's a discipline we must practice. It's finding different words and actions to respond to the reality. To be blessed, we need to be worthy of these blessings. Let us make our tents places of justice, peace, and humanity. Then the curses we have suffered from might be turned into blessings. Shabbat Shalom.